Hi, I'm James Dickey, Senior Counsel for the Upper Midwest Law Center, Minnesota's nonprofit public interest law firm that fights for liberty and the rule of law. Welcome back to the Minnesota Law Report, where we update you on important developments on legal issues in Minnesota and how we at UMLC are your voice fighting for you in the courts. Today, I'm joined again by Renee Carlson, President of True North Legal, another crucially important nonprofit public interest law firm that promotes and defends life, family, and religious freedom by engaging in education initiatives, public policy, and the courts. Renee, thanks so much for joining us again on the podcast.
Good to be here with you, James.
And today we're going to talk about developments in a couple of different religious liberty arenas, and also some concerning issues raising their heads in this year's legislative session at the Minnesota State Capitol. Well, Renee, why don't we start talking about the first religious liberty issue on at least my radar here, is our joint lawsuit on behalf of Anthony Schmidt against the Minnesota Department of Corrections. So we're excited, very excited to partner with True North Legal on this. Glad to be co-counsel representing Anthony Schmidt. And I'd like to just give the people a little bit of a snippet about what the case is about, and we can go from there.
Sure.
So the case, Schmidt versus Robertus, as it's called, is about Tony Schmidt, who is a Christian, who is a person who feels called to do prison ministry at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in St. Cloud, who had been actually teaching a class called the Quest for Authentic Manhood for a decade at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in St. Cloud, a voluntary program. Inmates did not have to take it. No, the state is not forcing anyone to take any religious programming. And he had taught it for a decade with over 1,000 people who had gone through the program. Many successful outcomes. People have shed tears, told their sons that they loved them. Sons told their dads that they were proud of them for the first time. All those kinds of good things happened. And then all of a sudden, in July of 2023, the Department of Corrections told Tony Schmidt, and I think we've got the actual quote here, that the program was going to be canceled because, quote, the program directly conflicts with the diversity, equity, and inclusivity values of the department by defining manhood, or the study of masculinity, through a biblical lens of what a real man looks like. And that's a direct quote from the Department of Corrections to our client.
Right.
And so, it is unbelievable to me that after the Supreme Court decided the case Fulton versus the city of Philadelphia, where the court said you cannot cancel, arrangements between your public partners and the private partners purely based on their religious beliefs. And that's exactly what happened here.
James, we are really concerned about what we're seeing here in the state of Minnesota and increased hostility towards people of faith and people of all faith, which we'll talk about more of that in a bit. But in this specific instance, we have a case where a program is actually helping these inmates to rehabilitate, to assimilate back into society successfully. They have created economic stability and emotional stability. This is good for our community, and this is good for our states. There's absolutely no reason, as we stated in the complaint, that this program should have been removed. And we know that studies even show us that recidivism rates decrease when people have faith-based programs. Again, this was in statute. We can have faith-based programs. And as you said, this wasn't required. This was voluntary. So there's actually no basis for this. It seems hostile and discriminatory towards our client.
That's right. And you pointed out the fact that there's a statute in Minnesota that specifically allows for and actually requires the Department of Corrections to include faith-based programming. And what better faith-based programming could there be than one that not only allows people to have faith programs and actually express their religion who are within the correctional facilities, but also ones that are going to help them be rehabilitated. Not just to believe a certain thing or anything like that, but also to become members of society again, who are fully part of society and are productive and it benefits everybody in our state, I think.
Absolutely, I agree.
And yet the Department of Corrections decided that because, and again, it comes back to what the DOC said. They said this is about their diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, and that they directly conflict with the Bible. And, maybe I'm not super surprised to hear them say that out loud, but it's a little bit of a shock when you actually hear that the DEI initiatives of the Department of Corrections are essentially against what the Bible says. And therefore, if you want to be a Christian who is a Bible-believing Christian, or if you want to be a Muslim person of faith or a Jewish person of faith who really believes the Orthodox traditions of your faith, that you don't have any place to actually actually help inmates be rehabilitated. You have to basically, as we've put it, adhere to the established type of Christianity, a state-approved Judaism, a state-approved Islam. You can't have your own beliefs. You have to have beliefs that have been vetted and are compatible with these New Age DEI requirements.
And this inclusion theme is really astounding because I sat here last year and said the same thing. How can we have inclusion when the whole premise of inclusion is actually exclusion of specific people, and particularly people of faith? That's protected by the First Amendment. That's protected by the Minnesota Constitution. And we're going to keep fighting alongside of you and alongside of others in this state to protect our religious freedom.
And I'm really glad to have you all working alongside with us because your expertise is very welcome in this case. And so, having discussed, you brought up the constitutional protections for Minnesotans of faith, and having discussed that a little bit now, it's a good segue into what's happening at the legislature. And my understanding is that the legislature is considering a potential amendment to the Minnesota Constitution, which they are calling the Equal Rights Amendment. It seems like a bit of an Orwellian name, considering that there are specific protections that are left out, as I understand it, of this proposed amendment. Now, I know that they didn't pass it in the last 2023 session, and so now we're moving into 2024. What is the status of this proposed amendment, and what does it do?
Well, it is a top priority for the legislature this year. They want to get it passed by both bodies. And at this point, they actually have time to make some changes to the language, where previously we did see some of a list of protected classes, which included creed, but not explicitly religion, which also included gender identity. But now they've stated that they're going to pass a more robust version of this. And let me tell you, this is not your grandmother's ERA. This is not the ERA of the 70s that protects women. It actually excludes women and erases women and all of their legal protections. But not only that, James, it erases protections for people of faith. And I'm going to read you the language that they would like to pass this year that could appear on the ballot. It says, all persons shall be guaranteed equal rights under the laws of the state. The state shall not discriminate against any person in intent or effect on account of race, color, national origin, ancestry, disability, or sex, including but not limited to pregnancy, pregnancy outcomes and reproductive freedom, gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation.
Okay. I didn't hear anything in there about religious beliefs.
Exactly.
I didn't hear anything about political affiliation.
Right.
And I do hear what you're saying, that, I hear the protection for sex, but I also see that there are specific protections for gender identity that could potentially erase those protections for sex as it relates to, for example, men's and women's sports.
We are seeing this in this type of language in bills, specifically in other states, being used to take away the rights of women. And this is astounding. This is absolutely something that all women should be concerned about, because this doesn't just impact them. This impacts their children. This absolutely impacts girls' opportunities in sports. This impacts women in prison facilities. If we have compassion for women, female-only prisons, is it right that, for example, a male inmate is in the Shakopee prison? That is the case here in Minnesota, and those types of arguments will only be strengthened if this language is proposed and passed. We've heard lately in the month of January and also in the past couple of weeks that this is the language that they want to go with, and if they have the votes, then they will pass it. Again, it's something that everyone should be concerned about. I think the religious part, the explicit omission of that should be concerning for all people, because this, again, affects a large population of people in Minnesota. If we're talking about erasing the rights of women, and we're talking about erasing the rights for faith-based communities, all faith-based communities in Minnesota, that is a large population of people in the state of Minnesota. How does that promote equality? And this is coming from the Big Tent Party.
Right. And this is the, that's why I said it's a little bit Orwellian. It seems more like an unequal rights amendment. So, if you don't get protection if you are discriminated against based on your political affiliation, right? Which is something that, frankly, we've seen happen across the state of Minnesota. You don't get protection under this amendment for your religious beliefs. And because this would be passed later in time than Article 1, Section 16 of the Minnesota Constitution, which currently is written to protect religious exercise and conscience protections, there's going to be arguments that somehow this amendment would trump that. And what I also don't understand,
it's a blank check for judges to discriminate, frankly, against women and against people of all faiths, and that is something of significant concern. And that just goes with the theme that we're talking about today for religious freedom. What does inclusion in the state of Minnesota actually mean? And in the name of equality and under this guise of equality, they're excluding many people and have the audacity to now remove religion.
Yeah, and that really is bothersome. And while I do think that at some point, if this is passed, and then the bottom line is it goes in front of the people of Minnesota. So if the legislature decides to put this on the ballot for the people of Minnesota, they have a choice to look past what appears to be language that is, flowery and nice sounding, the Equal Rights Amendment. Who doesn't believe in equal rights? Like, obviously everyone who has any kind of a brain does believe in equal rights, but it's not equal. This is the whole point. At some point, if it does pass, I could see, lawyers doing their best to try to blunt the impact of this. But boy, should it really be the case that we even have to do that?
Right. And you and I have talked about, off of the show, but just the consequences of this. I mean, will we continuously see people of faith being harassed by human rights commissions and constantly having to litigate these things? And it's just a matter of wearing people out so that eventually they silence them. People will self-censor. And that is not what a democracy is. That is not what America is. We have many people that are learning about this and are very concerned about the state of religious freedom and the protections for women and girls in the state of Minnesota if this language is in fact adopted this session and if it is actually what is passed and put on the ballot. So there is absolutely a necessity for people to become educated about what their rights are and what they want their rights to be in the state of Minnesota.
And, to some degree, it also seems like this type of amendment, like you said, what is its purpose beyond what the laws already protect? I mean, our Constitution, federal and state constitutions, already have equal protection provisions.
Minnesota Human Rights Act lists all the categories.
I mean, Minnesota Human Rights Act is a statute, but the fact is that the statute is still subject to the Constitution.
Absolutely.
So, for example, if you're a pharmacist and you don't want to give out a pill for an abortifacient because you believe that it would violate your own conscience and your belief, you can allow another pharmacist to do that without being sued, successfully at least, under the Minnesota Human Rights Act. That's currently what the case Anderson versus Aitken Pharmacy Services is saying. And that's, of course, before the Minnesota Court of Appeals on appeal. But I think that correctly understood, the Human Rights Act allows for exceptions for religious belief. But if this Equal Rights Amendment were to be passed, it essentially potentially creating a superseding protection that elevates other types of qualities over protecting religious freedom, there could be a real problem.
And again, by omission, you are making other categories superior to every other categorical protection that we have on the books right now, and that's concerning.
It is really concerning. Thank you for your work that you're doing to inform people and educate them about exactly what this law would do. And again, as an attorney who is in the courts on a constant basis, I can see exactly why this is such a problematic writing of this particular bill. Now, if it included things like religious expression, religious exercise, other things like that, maybe we would have a different discussion, but that's not what the language says right now.
At least not right now. What they have said in the media that they would like to pass this year does not include that.
Right.
So we'll see what the language shakes out to be, but there's a strong possibility that it won't.
Right. Well, good discussion. Thank you so much for this particular work that you're doing, like I said. And we'll hopefully see some common sense changes made by folks at the legislature to at least cause this particular proposal to be something that would actually protect all Minnesotans as opposed to just a real
equality amendment.
Right. Not an unequal rights amendment, an actual equal rights amendment. And so moving on to a different topic that's also been in the news lately, you and True North Legal and the First Liberty Institute have been representing, as I understand it, 6 Somali American Muslim women who have children in the St. Louis Park School District. to help them to opt out of curriculum that their parents and they believe is something that they should not be exposed to based on their religious beliefs. Can you talk more about the situation in St. Louis Park?
Well, back in around October, 6 Somali American women found out that their children were being taught lessons that engaged in LGBTQ gender ideology. They're young elementary age children, as young as 7. Then some 3rd graders and 4th graders came home and told their parents about lessons they had learned that were inconsistent with the values and beliefs of these families at home. And James, what these parents really wanted is for their children to learn things that are consistent with their beliefs and not things that are inconsistent with their beliefs. So by asking to opt out, they're simply asking for alternative instruction. They're not asking to have their children removed from school entirely or to be excused from, the English class and the principal lesson. What they're asking is that the basis of that lesson be consistent with their faith. So maybe they'll read a different book instead of a book about LGBTQ families and gender ideology, especially at this sensitive young age.
And this is an English class.
This is an English class.
So this is not a class on human sexuality.
No.
This is an English class being taught to young kids. Their parents you don't need to achieve the objectives of the English lesson by including things that are obviously going to be problematic for these families and their religious beliefs.
And this is, again, these are women that have stated over and over again, they respect and love all people. And I think that's true for all of us who might have these desires to opt our children out of certain things that we don't want them to be learning. It's about the time that they're learning it, who's teaching them, and what's being taught to them. And if it is inconsistent with the family's religious beliefs, then they do have a right under statute to opt their children out of instruction. They shouldn't face this kind of hostility. It's very simple.
Yeah, and it seems to me like one of the bedrock protections under the First Amendment is the right for parents to direct the upbringing of their children. That's from the Troxel case. It's been around for a century or more. And the fact is that when you have these kinds of lessons that are being taught, they're going to be a conflict. So the legislature has created, I think, a pretty common sense solution here. It's Minnesota Statute 120B.20, I believe.
Right.
And it provides a specific opt-out, so you can, consistent with the desire of the parent to direct the upbringing of your children, even while your kids are in public school, have alternative instruction that the parents are providing. It's not like the school has to go on a limb and spend all this extra money or create some kind of a huge hassle. And so I don't really understand the hostility from that perspective, because what it seems to me more is that school districts who aren't willing to work with the opt-out, not only are they violating state law as it currently stands and interfering with the First Amendment rights of parents, but they're also really just wanting to maintain some kind of iron-fisted control over what actually is taught to kids, and using English classes or science or math as a basis to indoctrinate kids to believe whatever they want believed seems very hostile to these parents.
And these families went over and above. The opt-out law doesn't require lots of explanation. It simply requires notification about certain topics and subjects that you would like your kids to be opted out of. And these parents, these mothers went over and above and explained, this has nothing to do with a person. This has to do with our sincerely held religious beliefs, the core of who we are and the core of what we believe about men and women and human sexuality. And that's something that's shared by many people. In fact, back in Obergefell, in that case in 2015, even that decision states that people of many diverse faiths, good people, can hold to the fact that there is such thing as men and women and have a traditional view of marriage and a traditional view of families.
And Obergefell, that is the case that the U.S. Supreme Court held that the right to same-sex marriage is protected by the Constitution.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
Even in that case,
I'm saying even in that case,
the court said you can maintain your own beliefs regardless of the beliefs that other people have about those issues of human sexuality.
So for any parent that is interested and concerned or needs some help with this, feel free to go to our website at truenorthlegal.org. We are happy to help other people with this. I mean, James, this is, of course, a win for these families and these mothers, but they've always stated that this is more than them. This is bigger than them. This is about helping helping not only their community, but other parents and other mothers who feel the same, who feel like their rights have been violated, who know that they've birthed these children, they've cared for these children, and they believe that they should have control over what they're learning. So again, this case, while it's St. Louis Park, it's much bigger than that. It means that any parent that wants to opt their child out of education in which they don't agree with, or lessons and materials that they don't agree with, has the right to do so. And while we're thankful that the school has recognized that, we are very disappointed that actually a few days later, some lawmakers held a press conference and called this out and said that opting children out of specifically LGBTQ lessons isn't good for anyone. Again, that really hit my clients hard because they do not have any hatred or any dislike towards anybody. This is about their sincerely held religious beliefs. And it is very concerning that lawmakers in the Minnesota legislature do not respect the sincerely held religious beliefs of Somali American Muslims or anybody else in the state of Minnesota, if that's the kind of statements that they're making.
Yeah, that's really frustrating. And, I think that's consistent with an unfortunate effort to define hate as essentially disagreement with what you believe about human sexuality, about the mystery of life and what we do as people in this world.
And that's what we've talked about today. Is interesting. When we first planned me coming on the podcast, some of these things weren't even settled, and now we're kind of seeing everything rise to the surface. There is an attack on people of faith in Minnesota. We have the DOC case. We have the ERA that just wraps it all together and could make that actually law. And now we have the St. Louis Park case, a school district of a diverse community who's being attacked for their religious beliefs. So again, this is something that I think a lot of your viewers would probably be interested in, and I hope continue to pay attention to, because there's a lot of activity here on the First Amendment front in Minnesota. And of course, you and I are paying attention to that every day.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Renee, for coming on the podcast, for sharing your story about what's going on in St. Louis Park, what you're doing at the Capitol related to the Equal Rights Amendment, and for your partnership with us on the Schmidt versus Robertus case in the federal district court. So we really appreciate True North Legal. We appreciate you coming on the podcast
Thank you. We appreciate UMLC. Great work we get to do together.
Thank you for that. That's it for this week on the Minnesota Law Report. You can learn more about the Upper Midwest Law Center by visiting umlc.org. And you can also make a confidential tax-deductible donation on our website at umlc.org/donate. Likewise, you can learn more about Renee's work at True North Legal by visiting truenorthlegal.org. And you can make a tax-deductible donation to support their work as well by clicking the donate button on their website. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.